4,000 men marched from Medina under Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas toward the Euphrates facing Persian forces that classical chroniclers place, variously, from 20,000 to more than 100,000, according to Al-Tabari and Ibn al-Athir. How could a community born in the desert, still raw from internal trials, dare to carry the caliphate's future into the heart of Sassanid Persia? Medina had always been the crucible of decisions. If Sa'd failed, the loss would not be merely territorial. Ctesiphon, al-Mada'in, the granaries of Mesopotamia, and the very stability of Umayyad's new order were at stake. As Al-Tabari records, the caliph weighed the risk and selected Sa'd for command. Ibn al-Athir notes that this appointment carried the urgency of a state on the doorstep of war. The challenge was stark and immediate. Sources vary, but Al-Tabari gives Muslim field strength in the campaign as between 4,000 and 30,000 men in different phases. Ibn al-Athir reports Persian host numbers ranging from 20,000 up to figures that dwarf them both. The ground chosen for the contest was the plain of al-Qadisiyah, beside the Euphrates and not far from the great city of al-Mada'in. The terrain would allow a pitched encounter away from the walls and palaces where Persian power was strongest, but it would also expose Sa'd's men to the weight of superior numbers and to the Persian cavalry and war-band traditions recorded by the chroniclers. Sa'd's reasoning, as the sources portray it, was strategic rather than reckless. Al-Tabari relates that Sa'd sought to force battle on the plain to prevent the Persians from using their fortified riverine positions at Ctesiphon and to cut their communications with Arab federates. Ibn Kathir emphasizes that the commander understood the political cost of retreat, loss of morale in the Muslim armies, and a signal to other frontier peoples that Medina's mandate could be resisted. He therefore resolved to hold ground and to seek decisive engagement rather than scattering into defensive skirmishes. Tension mounted as scouts and messengers ran between camps. Ibn al-Athir records days of probing fights, councils, and the sending of urgent letters back to Medina requesting reinforcements. In those councils, according to Al-Tabari, Sa'd faced the tangible weight of human fear. Veteran companions who had seen blood in the peninsula, younger men anxious for the fate of families and property left behind, and officers debating whether to seek shelter behind the Euphrates or to engage on open ground. Sa'd is presented by the historians as neither a mythic hero nor a mere instrument of policy. Ibn Kathir and Ibn Khaldun both underline his human dimension, a leader measuring loss against loyalty, command against compassion. The immediate payoff of his decision began to show in the opening clashes. By fixing the Persians on the plain of al-Qadisiyah, Sa'd prevented them from drawing the Muslim force into costly sieges of fortified towns and kept the initiative in Muslim hands, as Al-Tabari and Ibn al-Athir describe in their day-by-day chronicles of the engagement. Even so, victory was not yet won. The Persian commander remained in the field, and reinforcements could still alter the balance. Night fell on the camp, with both armies grinding at each other's edges. Sa'd prayed, reviewed his men, and sent another dispatch to Medina. What nobody in the small army understood in that hour was how close the Sasanian court already stood to sending the decisive counterstroke, and whether the letters Sa'd had sent for help would arrive in time. Evntscovrid. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas appointed to command, marched from Medina to al-Qadisiyah, initial confrontations at the plain of al-Qadisiyah, sources. Al-Tabari, Ibn al-Athir, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Khaldun. In the narrow alleys of Mecca, a 17-year-old boy becomes the third or fourth man to ever accept Islam. His name is Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. This decision, made in secret, will ignite a firestorm that threatens to tear his prestigious clan, the Banu Zura, apart from within. If Sa'd fails to hold his ground, the nascent Muslim community loses not just a believer, but a critical link to the powerful Quraysh. The very survival of the message rests on the courage of its earliest, most vulnerable followers. Sa'd's conversion is an act of profound strategic defiance. The Quraysh leadership, led by men like Abu Jahl and Abu Sufyan, maintain power through tribal unity and control of the pagan pilgrimage trade. Each new Muslim, especially one from a noble lineage, represents a crack in that foundation. As Ibn Kathir notes in al-Bidayah wa al-Nihaya, Sa'd was among the very first to embrace Islam, a fact that made him a prime target. His mother, Hamna bint Sufyan, belonged to the Umayyad clan, placing her at the heart of the opposition. The tactical challenge was not on a battlefield, but in the home. Could a youth withstand the immense pressure from the very people sworn to protect him? The crisis arrives with terrifying intimacy. Upon learning of her son's new faith, Sa'd's mother employs the ultimate weapon a Meccan mother possesses, a hunger strike. As Al-Tabari records in his Tariq, she vowed not to eat or drink until Sa'd renounced Muhammad. She declared she would die, and the shame of causing a mother's death would forever haunt him. For days, the standoff continues. Sa'd is faced with an impossible choice: betray the truth he now holds dear, or be responsible for his mother's suffering and potential death. According to Ibn al-Athir, Sa'd, witnessing her weakening state, faced this moral abyss. The weight of Arab tribal honor, the filial piety demanded by tradition, pressed down upon him. His resolution is a testament to a new kind of strength. He approaches his mother and says, as narrated by the historians, "O mother, if you had 100 souls and they left your body one by one, I would not abandon my faith." He would provide her with food and water, but he would not recant a single word. Seeing his unshakable conviction, she finally relents and ends her strike. This personal victory establishes a core principle: loyalty to God transcends even the deepest tribal and familial bonds. It proves that the faith can withstand internal, psychological siege. But the Quraysh's wrath is not so easily sated. The persecution escalates from familial pressure to public violence. Sa'd, alongside other vulnerable Muslims, endures beatings and abuse in the streets of Mecca. The leadership decides on a more final solution: dispersion. To survive, a group of Muslims must flee entirely. As Ibn Kathir documents, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas is among the first group to undertake the hijrah to Abyssinia, seeking refuge under the Christian Negus. He boards a ship, leaving his home, his clan, and everything he knows behind. The boy who drew the first blood for Islam is now an exile. But the question hangs in the sea air: is this flight a defeat or a strategic withdrawal to preserve the very future of the message? Evntscovid. Sa'd's early conversion and familial pressure, his mother's hunger strike, and his response, his migration to Abyssinia. In the year 627, with only 300 men under his command, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas stood before the impregnable fortress of Banu Qurayza in Medina. The stakes could not have been higher. If he failed, the fledgling Muslim community would be crushed. The very survival of Islam hung in the balance. Al-Tabari records in his Tariq that the Banu Qurayza had betrayed the Muslims, siding with the Meccan pagans and the Jewish tribes of Qaribah. Their treachery had dealt a near-fatal blow to the Muslim cause. Sa'd knew that the fortress was well supplied and heavily fortified. Its walls were thick, its defenses strong. Direct assault would lead to certain disaster. Sa'd's strategic mind turned to the terrain. The fortress was built on high ground, overlooking the surrounding land. It was a position of strength, designed to repel any attack. But Sa'd saw an opportunity. The fortress relied on water from a well outside its walls. If he could cut off their water supply, he could force them to surrender without a single arrow being loosed. He ordered his men to dig trenches, diverting the water away from the well. Ibn al-Athir notes in Al-Kamil that the Banu Qurayza initially scoffed at the Muslims' efforts. They believed their fortress impregnable, their supplies vast. But as the days turned to weeks, the reality of their situation became clear. The well was drying up. Their water was running out. Doubts gnawed at Sa'd. What if his plan failed? What if the Banu Qurayza found another source of water? What if they decided to fight to the death? The weight of his decision pressed heavily upon him. As Al-Tabari recorded, Sa'd gathered his commanders and consulted them. The scouts reported that the Banu Qurayza were growing desperate. They were considering breaking out, fighting their way to the water. Sa'd knew that if they did, the battle would be brutal, the casualties high. He had to act fast. Sa'd ordered his men to tighten the siege. They built huts of palm leaves, concealing their movements from the Banu Qurayza. They dug deeper trenches, cutting off all routes to water. The Banu Qurayza were trapped. Ibn al-Athir records that after 25 days, the Banu Qurayza could bear no longer. They surrendered, opening their gates to Sa'd and his men. The fortress was taken without a single Muslim casualty. The betrayal of the Banu Qurayza was ended, their treachery punished. But the victory was not without cost. The surrender of the Banu Qurayza exposed the deep divisions within the Jewish tribes of Arabia. Their betrayal had been a calculated move, a desperate gamble to stem the rise of Islam. But it had backfired spectacularly. The Muslim community was shaken but unbroken. The fortress of Banu Qurayza had fallen, but the war was far from over. Ibn al-Athir notes that the defeat of the Banu Qurayza sent a clear message to the other Jewish tribes. Defiance would be met with swift and decisive action. But what nobody knew was that 200 miles south, a new army was already marching, ready to challenge the authority of the Prophet Muhammad once more. EVNTSCOVID. Siege of Banu Qurayza, strategic water cut-off, surrender of Banu Qurayza. The sun beat down on the dusty plains of Al-Qadisiyah, but the true heat came from the Persian army, an estimated 60,000 strong, arrayed against the vastly outnumbered Muslim forces. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, his heart heavy with the weight of command, surveyed the enemy's might. His own army, numbering around 6,000, was a fraction of their strength. This was not merely a battle for territory. It was a struggle for the very survival of Islam, a test of faith against overwhelming material power. Failure here would mean the undoing of years of sacrifice, the crushing of a nascent empire under the heel of the Sasanian Empire. The Persian host was a terrifying spectacle. Elephants, beasts of war unknown to many of the Arab warriors, were deployed to break the Muslim lines. Their cavalry, clad in mail, was renowned for its ferocity. The Muslim warriors, though fewer, were united by a singular purpose, their faith a shield against despair. Sa'd knew that brute force would not suffice. He had to employ cunning, to exploit the enemy's weaknesses and the terrain to his advantage. As Al-Tabari recorded, Sa'd sought counsel from his commanders. They discussed the Persian formations, the deployment of their war elephants, and the strategic importance of the nearby Euphrates River. Sa'd's strategy was bold: to lure the Persian cavalry into a trap, to neutralize the terrifying elephants, and to fight a war of attrition where discipline and faith could overcome numbers. He ordered his archers to focus their volleys on the elephants' eyes. aiming to disorient and incapacitate the beasts rather than kill them outright. He planned to use the terrain, channeling the enemy into areas where their numerical superiority would be less effective. The battle raged for days. The ground trembled with the charge of Persian horsemen and the trumpeting of panicked elephants. Sa'd himself, though unwell, directed the fighting with unwavering resolve. Yet there were moments when the sheer ferocity of the assault threatened to overwhelm them. During one critical engagement, a Persian arrow, poisoned and flying with deadly accuracy, struck Sa'd. He fell, his vision blurring, the taste of venom on his tongue. Doubt gnawed at him. Was this the end? Could his army endure without his leadership in this pivotal moment? As Ibn al-Athir notes, the Muslim lines wavered, sensing their commander's peril. But Sa'd, through sheer will and the grace of Allah, refused to succumb. Though weakened, he insisted on being moved to a place where he could still observe the battlefield, his voice, though faint, issuing commands. His presence, even in suffering, galvanized his men. They fought with renewed ferocity, remembering the Prophet's own trust in him. The tactic of targeting the elephants' eyes proved devastatingly effective. The panicked beasts turned on their own ranks, sowing chaos. The Persian cavalry, its momentum broken, found itself facing disciplined ranks of Muslim warriors who fought with the ferocity of cornered lions. The tide began to turn. As the dust settled on the third day, the Persian army was in disarray, their mighty host shattered. Yet, even in victory, Sa'd knew the struggle was far from over. The remnants of the Persian army were retreating, but intelligence reports spoke of a new threat, a formidable force gathering far to the north, preparing to march south. The relief of victory was short-lived, replaced by the grim anticipation of what lay ahead. EVNTSCOVID, Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas being wounded by a poisoned arrow. With between 700 and 1,000 men facing roughly 3,000 Quraysh at the slopes of Mount Uhud north of Medina, the Muslim force stood on a razor's edge of survival. One mistake, one exposed flank, could mean annihilation. As Al-Tabari records, the numerical imbalance was clear. Ibn Kathir likewise gives the Muslims strength as between 700 and 1,000, while the Meccan host approached 3,000. If the defenders failed, Medina itself, the nascent Muslim polity, and the Prophet's life were at stake. Ibn Kathir emphasizes that the stakes were not merely military, but existential. A rout here would shatter the confidence of tribes who had recently allied with the Prophet and invite renewed aggression from Meccan allies. The Prophet therefore arrayed his men with careful attention to terrain and to the single most pressing danger. A cavalry or flanking moved through the pass that guarded the rear of the Muslim position. Strategically, the Muslims took position on the slopes of Uhud with their backs to the mountain and a small hill guarding the path to Medina. Al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir both report that the Prophet posted a contingent of archers, recorded as 50 in these sources, upon that hill specifically to hold the pass and prevent any turning movement. The logic was simple and stark. Hold the high ground, deny the enemy the rear, and the Meccan cavalry could not exploit the slope to roll up the Muslim line. That tactical choice reflects the commander's acute reading of the terrain. A compact force could hold a decisive point if it obeyed orders. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas is recorded by the classical historians as among the companions present at Uhud. He stood with the community whose very future hung in the balance. Ibn Khaldun later would interpret such moments as the ultimate tests of group cohesion. The historian's framework helps us see how individual courage and collective discipline were two sides of the same strategic coin. Tension reached its peak when the ordered anchor at the rear failed. As Al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir recount, some of the archers abandoned their posts, lured by the spoils of early successes, and exposed the Muslim rear. Ibn al-Athir names Khalid ibn al-Walid as the Meccan commander who seized the opening. The result was immediate and deadly. The Muslim formation was turned, the Prophet was wounded, and the community suffered grievous losses, including the martyrdom of Hamza, as Ibn Kathir and Ibn al-Athir record. Sources vary on total Muslim dead, but estimates range from 70 to 75 according to Al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir. Ibn al-Athir places Meccan casualties at about 20 to 22. In the crisis, the companions faced fear, exhaustion, and the unbearable sight of their leader struck down. Some retreated. Others, including Sa'd as the sources confirm, remained among those who bore the bitter cost. The immediate tactical payoff for the Meccans was clear: a broken Muslim front and a lifted siege on Medina's outskirts. But victory was not complete. What none could yet know was whether this painful check would be the end of the threat or the beginning of a larger storm gathering beyond the horizon. Would the community hold, unite, and prepare for the next trial? Or would the defeat at Uhud invite a new coalition to finish what had been nearly achieved? EVNTSCOVID. Battle of Uhud, archers' withdrawal and Khalid ibn al-Walid's flanking maneuver, martyrdoms and casualties at Uhud. In the year 6 AH, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, led 1,400 of his companions from Medina toward Mecca, seeking to perform the pilgrimage. As Ibn Kathir records in Al-Bidya wa al-Nihya, they were unarmed, wearing the simple garments of pilgrims. But the Quraysh of Mecca saw not devotion, but invasion. They mobilized their forces and blocked the mountain passes, determined to prevent the Muslims from reaching the sacred house by any means necessary. The stakes were existential. A single misstep, a retreat perceived as cowardice, a violent clash while in a state of ritual consecration could shatter the moral authority of the Muslim community and embolden every enemy surrounding Medina. Failure meant humiliation and potentially a devastating war on terms not of their choosing. The Prophet halted at Hudaybiyah, a barren plain just outside Mecca's sanctuary boundary. He dispatched Uthman ibn Affan as an emissary to negotiate entry. Then a terrible rumor swept through the camp. Uthman had been killed. This was the crisis. With their envoy seemingly murdered in violation of all Arabian norms, and the Quraysh army massed before them, the Muslims faced a moment of profound peril and decision. The Prophet, under a solitary acacia tree, called for a pledge. As Ibn Kathir narrates, one by one, then in waves, the 1,400 men came forward. They swore upon their lives that they would stand with him, to the death if necessary. This was the pledge of the tree, the Bayat al-Ridwan. Among those who pledged, commanding the rear guard of the entire Muslim position, was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Al-Tabari notes in his Tariq that Sa'd was entrusted with this critical defensive post. His vigilance and resolve a shield against any surprise attack from the Quraysh, while the community's focus was on the oath. The pledge was not a prelude to battle, but its strategic masterpiece was in its unified defiance. It demonstrated an unbreakable collective will that the Quraysh, for all their numbers, could not match. This resolve forced the Quraysh back to the negotiating table. Uthman was revealed to be alive, and the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was signed. Its terms seemed outwardly unfavorable to the Muslims. They would return to Medina without performing the pilgrimage that year. But the Prophet saw the deeper victory: recognition as a sovereign entity by Mecca, and a 10-year peace that would allow Islam to spread unchallenged by their most powerful foe. Sa'd returned to Medina, having borne the weight of safeguarding the community's most vulnerable flank at its moment of greatest tension. The treaty promised stability, but for a warrior like Sa'd, peace was a temporary state. The Quraysh had been checked, yet the map of Arabia was filled with other powers watching, waiting to test the strength of this new state from Medina. The pledge under the tree had solidified their faith, but the desert always held another threat. As Ibn al-Athir notes in Al-Kamil, the very next year, the Prophet would march against a different, fortified enemy. The warriors who swore allegiance at Hudaybiyah would soon be called upon again. For Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, the respite was over. Evntscovid, the pledge of the tree, Bayat al-Ridwan at Hudaybiyah, the signing of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah,